So I think if you think of data...
Okay, so good morning, everyone. I think Pablo and I hadn't spoken before preparing these talks, but I think what I'm going to touch on follows on quite nicely and picks up on some of the key points. But I'm also going to start like Pablo did, and I've chatted to Michelle in detail about I don't think my talk fits with this kind of concept of data visualization. So this was kind of looking at different definitions of data visualization. I kind of pulled them all together, and this is what I came up with. And am I doing this? Not necessarily to the audience that's here. There's nothing special about the data visualization of what I'm necessarily going to present today. But I think what I'm going to, hopefully you'll agree by the end of the talk, is this concept of novel results. And they're not novel in the sense of they're new or they're really sophisticated. They're novel in the sense of how at Leeds Beckett we've worked really successfully with Leeds City Council using existing data sources to really understand the role of the environment at a local level. And I think that's really, really important. National data is key, it's really important, but we need to know the context within the local levels in which we're working. So lots of the things we've spoke about in the network to date has very much been around the food environment, and indeed we have done some of that work as well. But the work I'm going to present today is about physical activity in the environment in Leeds. So we all know as a nation we're not as active as we perhaps should be, and the health consequences of that are very serious. Increasingly, over the kind of last 5 years, there's a huge interest in sedentary behaviour and in the impact of being sedentary. Even if you are physically active, if you also spend a lot of time sedentary, the health consequences are equally as important. So there's this push about not just focusing on physical activity, but also looking at sedentary behaviour. And interestingly, one of the things I'll kind of conclude, but this slide shows it quite nicely, is how the media can spin. You can spend hours and hours writing your paper to try and not give any misleading messages, and then it's in a headline. And you know, lots of these the media articles around this paper didn't actually reflect what was in the paper, so again it was quite misleading. So as I said, there's a real case for trying to get the nation and the public active and reducing sedentary behaviour. And from a policy perspective and a research perspective, there has been a big drive in the role of the environment in this. So what's the role in the environment of increasing our activity behaviour, or indeed decreasing our sedentary behaviour? Some fantastic work going on from a policy perspective with recommendations which are perfectly logical but are not very evidence-based. And lots of the research, it's very much from a physical activity standpoint, it's very much based on perception. So how people perceive their environment rather than what they actually do in their environment for activity. So what we did, chatting to colleagues that I work with at Leeds City Council, they have an initiative called Leeds Let's Get Active. That's the aim of the activity there. So anyone in Leeds can sign up to Leeds Let's Get Active and attend sessions in different leisure centres for free. Just kind of in a conversation and hearing about this project, I got a real sense for how big this data was. So there's over 60,000 people in this database that they're collecting data for in Leeds. But they were doing it, all that Leeds City Council were monitoring it for was how many people have signed up. How many people have gone online and signed up to this? And Leeds Beckett's role was the evaluation of this project, and that's a different team to me. But what I was really interested in, well, okay, we have all this data, we have consent to use it for research purposes, so let's have a look at the association between the environment in which these people live and their activity levels. It is self-report, which, again, different people have different opinions. So physical activity was reported through the IPAC, and so was sedentary behaviour. So there are limitations around the methodology of the activity, but for the first time we get this vast of data within a local area to try and map it out. So the first thing that we were interested in was the association between opportunities for physical activity in the environment, and actually how active or sedentary an individual was. So similarly, we use the points of interest data. It's quite challenging working with lots of local authorities to get the physical activity data from the local authorities, as in where are the opportunities for physical activity. Seems to be much easier with food. So we use the points of interest data, and again, picking up the point kind of Pablo ended on, this is the categorization system we used. I'm not saying this is the correct one or even the best one, it's the one we used for this paper. So green space, specialised facilities are things like a karate club or a ballet class. General facilities are things like your leisure centre, your swimming pool, where you can just go in and do lots of activities, and then all of those combined. We ran the analysis at a mid-super output area level and also using buffers of the residential postcode. When we looked at the activity behaviour of individuals and the deprivation of the area in which we live, we can see that the most deprived group are less likely to be active. Okay, again, no great surprise, in line with national data. But we also found that the most deprived group are less likely to be sedentary. Again, this agrees with national data, and it's primarily down to the fact we use IPAC and sitting time for the measure of this. But this in itself is quite interesting, because lots of people kind of through conversations are, well, we need to target everything then to this quartile 4. They're the least likely to be active. We need to go and place all our emphasis and all of our resources there. When we looked at where things are, so this is Leeds, and the boundaries are the lower super output areas. You can see that the difference is there. When we looked at access, so the lower super output areas shaded blue are lower super output areas that do not have any physical activity facilities in them. So there's no green space, none of those categories I told you. And again, some people look at that like, well, let's go and target those areas. If they're the areas that don't have facilities in them, we need to go and target those areas. The areas shaded red are where there's no green space. And this follows on perfect from the question, because I know Leeds, points of interest might not be that accurate for green space, because some of those areas have green space in them. So again, it's about how confident are we with the quality of our secondary data. But then when we looked at the physical activity, again, the prevalence data was in line with national data, and this is it mapped across the city. So green is favourable, more people are meeting the physical activity recommendations, but there doesn't seem to be a consistent pattern about where they are, and I'm not sure if you can see, but the numbers represent the number of opportunities in those boundaries. And then again, the same for sedentary behaviour. So we don't see an obvious pattern. Here it's perhaps more clustered city centre, you could argue, but you don't see a really consistent pattern. And we did do the multi-level modelling behind this for people clustered within these areas, and there was no area level effect. So being clustered in these areas didn't really influence your sedentary behaviour or activity. When we then put this into the model, so this was this is controlling for the deprivation of where the people live and their age and gender. We can see that the most exposed group, so the top line, so those who have the most opportunities for physical activity, are actually more likely to meet the physical activity guidelines. But we don't find anything for sedentary behaviour. So again, it's kind of trying to write this up into a paper, do we just focus on this one line here and say yes, there's a relationship, or it's really important that we look at the whole picture, and is the environment actually linking physical activity behaviour? From a methodological point of view, it's really key. The different definition of the environment produces very different results. So lots of local authorities work with administrative boundaries, so I think it's really important we maintain that in research. But when we start to look at the 2-kilometre buffers, we lose any effect. And again, part of the issue I have with research is poor reporting. When you're reading papers, it's not always necessarily clear what definitions they've used. And we find the same for sedentary behaviour. We find no relationship with sedentary behaviour at mid-super output area or 2 kilometre buffer. So being exposed to more opportunities for physical activity, whether that's within the administrative boundaries or the 2 kilometre buffers, doesn't influence an individual's sedentary behaviour. So the conclusions we drew from this paper is that although it has intuitive appeal, it makes perfect logical sense. If you live next to these opportunities, perhaps you're more likely to use them. This data, the bigger picture, didn't really support that. And from a point of influencing policy, we need to be careful not to just hang on to that one odds ratio. And I took this, I don't know where the reference has gone, but this is from Adam Dranowski's work of the food environment. And I think it captures even what it fits to the physical activity environment. So proximity isn't necessarily a good index of exposure. One of the major problems I had when we were writing this up and doing this work is that this didn't have any information about the actual individuals. So all we knew was the individual lives here and these are the opportunities around them. We had no idea if they even used those opportunities. If they did, how far did they travel? So it's all, we're assuming this link, but we didn't have that information. So we went back to the team at Leeds Let's Get Active, and they actually collate all this information. They've got an amazing database of the actual, so there's a slight shift in focus now with stage 2, because all we're looking at here is, of the people that signed up to the Leeds Let's Get Active programme, which physical activity venue did they attend? So this is just looking at 15 venues within Leeds that are part of the Leeds Let's Get Active programme. But we could start to understand where people go. So we were interested in, do people attend the venue closest to them? The first 2 questions are the same, I'm sorry. And then, is this stratified by deprivation? So are the more affluent people prepared to travel further? And so on and so forth. So for this we had just under 30,000 people that signed up to Leeds Let's Get Active online. Interestingly, less than half of them actually attended any leisure centre. So although they signed up online, they filled out the demographic information, filled out the IPAC, so on and so forth, they never actually got to the point of visiting one of these, which in itself is really interesting from a behaviour change perspective. So this is again the map. So the big green dots are the leisure centres, which were focused on here, and these are the people which attended. So these are the 46% of people that actually attended these leisure centres. And this area kind of up, where there's kind of lots of white in the top right, that is a very rural area, so we wouldn't expect to see lots and lots of green dots there. But we get a good spread of people across the city. We seem to be hitting all the different areas of the city. But when we look at the same map, but where are the 54% of the people that never attended, it's pretty much identical. So it's not like we're getting clusters of people that are attending from different areas of the city. But again, it's this that kind of gets reported a lot of the time, and not this. So we're doing something right for these people, but not necessarily over here.
Sorry, is that their home address?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sorry, this is their residential address, yes. This is just an example. So we looked at all the 15 leisure centres. I'm not going to show you 15 maps, but this is just one as an example. So you can see the reach. So this is actually Armley, which is where the leisure centre is based, is the most deprived area of all the 15 leisure centres. But we still get a reach from across the city. It's clustered around the green dot, as we'd expect, but we do still get this reach from across the city. And this is just kind of makes a point really clearly around we need to actually understand the people. So the blue dot here is a different, oh no, it's Armley again. This is a 2 kilometre buffer. So within a 2 kilometre buffer, the green dots are people that attended Armley. So those people live within a 2 kilometre distance and they attended that leisure centre. The red dots are people which signed up but never attended anything. So again, lots of them. The black dots are people which signed up, they attended a leisure centre but they didn't attend this one, which is the assumption we make. Everyone's going to go to what's closest to them. So there's lots and lots of people that attend these leisure centres but they don't necessarily attend the one closest to them. And apologies, it's very poor data visualisation, but I really couldn't think how, because this is really striking to me. So if these are the 15 leisure centres, the N are the number of people that attended that leisure centre. So if we look at Armley, for example, 2,986 people attended Armley, okay? Using administrative boundaries captures the tiniest proportion of people that actually use that leisure centre. So if we do all of our analysis at LSOA level, we're capturing less than 5% of the people that actually went to Armley. And I knew it wasn't going to be incredibly high, but I was really shocked at how low this was. Using a 4 kilometre buffer seems to capture most of the people as a percentage that actually use those leisure centres. So again, it's this kind of methodological issue of where people are actually going. And you know, if we've got a paper or we're kind of combining papers that have used administrative boundaries, we should not be comparing those results. They're not comparable to papers that have used different definitions of the environment. Again, apologies, but I think the numbers are really important. So in this table, the N here is everybody that signed up for Leeds Let's Get Active within the different boundaries. So again, if we look at Armley, 3,215 people live within the 2 kilometre buffer of that leisure centre. Okay? In almost every occasion, we missed 50% of the people in every environment. So we're getting them to sign up, but then as a percentage, almost 50% in every single definition of the environment we use are not attending anything. They're not attending any leisure centre. Yet we say, if you have a leisure centre within a certain distance, you're more likely to be active. This kind of, and this is very descriptive. It's not complex. It's not heavy statistics. It's very descriptive, but I think really, really powerful in understanding people's behaviours. And then the last 2 points of this was over a third of the people didn't attend the venue closest to their home. So and this wasn't we stratified this by deprivation score, and it was kind of consistent across those quartiles. So people in the most around a third in each of the deprivation quartiles didn't attend the leisure centre closest to their home. As I'll come to, we have no idea why they went to the leisure centre they did. It may be it's on their commute to work, we don't know, but the important thing is this issue of proximity within this defined boundary is potentially really misleading. And if you look at, these are the people that didn't attend the venue closest to their home, and the colours represent deprivation. So green is the most affluent, the deep red are the most deprived areas of Leeds. Again, they look very much like the first 2 maps I showed you. So there's people from all over the city that are travelling significant differences to attend different leisure centres. They're not all going to the immediate one. And then the last point was, of anyone that attended, 80% of them always attended the same leisure centre. Now again, you're like, well, yeah, that's obvious. I can't find any papers that have got just this basic descriptive information around where people actually go in their usage. So once people attend a leisure centre, they tend to attend the same one. But it's this issue about proximity. And that's the same. So these are the people which attended the same leisure centre. These are the people which attended different leisure centres, so they didn't always attend the same one. And again, they're spread across the city. There's no immediate, obvious pattern there. So conclusions to this, these are my conclusions. Geographical location may be relatively unimportant, and when we're thinking about planning and allocation of resources and these kind of things, we might need to think beyond these administrative boundaries. And the same direction that we're going in for the food environment, other things may be more important. So there's a lot cost of food, opportunities of food on offer. I think the same applies here. People may travel to a certain leisure centre purely because they don't do yoga at their closest one, so they travel over here. Or it may be cost isn't an issue here because it's free, but I think the same principles apply to the physical activity environment as they do for the food. Just pure geographic location may not be the most important thing. And I come back to this, again building on Adam's work. So to kind of, the one thing which I would expect most people to ask was, well, did you actually calculate how people got to these leisure centres? Unfortunately, we don't, because as you all know, there are hundreds of routes to one leisure centre. So we kind of started doing this with straight line distances and buffers and networks, and it just got too speculative. So we don't have this information, but this is the next step, kind of working with the Leeds Let's Get Active team to understand the routes that people take to these leisure centres. So my kind of issues with and this applies to the food environment as well as the physical activity environment, is, you know, people aren't goldfish, and this is it in my head. We don't stay within these predefined boundaries and never move out of them. Some people do. Some people don't move out of whatever we define a neighbourhood, and somehow we need to try and capture this. It's incredibly challenging, and lots of people need to come together to do that, but I think it's lots of the papers are very misleading, especially from looking at, and this is Leeds specific, I accept that, but you know, if we're only capturing 3% of the people at LSOA level, that's incredibly misleading when we're interpreting outputs. The question that was asked before, I think, is really key. We use points of interest data, but you're always weighing up this issue of how accurate is it, can I trust it, it's the best we have. Does that mean that's okay, we just use it? And I think that there is a lot more work, and I know, investigating this with some other work, in relation to the physical activity, points of interest for Leeds wasn't that accurate, especially with their definition of green space. And fundamentally, and I think we'd all agree here, is we can't miss out the people. There's so much work, and it's fantastic work, where we're bringing data sets together and we're drawing associations, but until we can understand the people and why they do what they do, it's always speculative. And again, this is challenging, it's huge methodological work, but I think we need to try and move towards this. And then I'll just finish with this, because I use this a lot with my students, and I think this, going back to Pablo's point, these points are why the research gets misrepresented in policy a lot, I think. And I think there's a lot more to do with us as academics working with the media, working with public health, working with policymakers to understand what we're trying to say. But unfortunately, there are some researchers out there they do sensationalise results, which perhaps shouldn't be sensationalised, and that gets picked up with public health and can be problematic. These 2 points, I think I'm really passionate about local level analysis. I think it's really important, but then we also need to understand the national picture. So this issue of, you know, this works in Leeds, therefore it's relevant to the UK, is crazy, but also this is the UK, everyone do the same, it is equally as crazy. So we need to find the balance there, and then which leads to the unreplicable results. And then, so where are we going to the future with this? We are now working through the whole systems approach project and the integrated lifestyle delivery programme down in Suffolk, working with More Life. We're now working with 6 local authorities across the UK to replicate this level of detail, so we can take out that context-specific focus. So we're not saying this is just Leeds. We are saying this is representative of all of these local authorities. And Emma, who's here somewhere, so Emma's our PhD student who will be leading on a lot of this work in trying to validate some of the data sets across different areas and look at some of these associations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Don't have any questions for Claire? Go for it.
Yes. Did you look for swimming pool? Because I think that actually leisure facilities are attractive to people because they have swimming pools, and you don't, mind if it's far away, but you're going for that. That would matter a lot.
Yes. So within what we presented here, we included that in general facilities. We did do it separately, those with swimming pools and those without. But we had to do that manually. But that was manageable because there was only 15 centres, because that information is not on point. We found the same thing, but on a national scale that would be quite difficult because the data is not on points of interest. But we didn't find anything different to what we presented with the general facilities.
Okay.
So I think in terms of sort of the meat of your presentation, you've hit on something that's actually quite interesting, because actually what you're doing has been done and is sort of continues to be done quite a lot in things like health services research. So how we access primary care centres or how we access hospitals. But it's not really done in this area.
Yeah.
And there's a sort of point to saying that perhaps that's not because we see sports and leisure facilities as necessarily being health services. But certainly there's a lot of kind of potential there to start integrating those approaches. And also the kind of health economics sort of angle. So what you've got are essentially potential but also revealed preferences about how people use services, and beginning to look at sort of what the differences are and what the patterns are in that actually could be really sort of interesting in sort of what it might uncover for these kind of health supportive environments. So there's not really a question there, but it's just a comment because it sort of really resonates that what you're doing is novel in this area that has great potential for sort of transplanting.
And I really kind of struggled to get so I went to the team that I work with and I was like, but it's really basic. And I was like, I haven't, and it's, it doesn't need to be really difficult. And I think this has only worked because of the relationship we have with the local authority. And they've been open to kind of share, and hoping we're building that trust now with all these local authorities to do exactly that, because it's not difficult in the sense of complex statistics and things like that, but it's really key.
Can I have Chair's prerogative and ask a question? So, no, I appreciate your point about the local is not always the best unit of exposure. I mean, I think that's kind of, if you look at the neighbourhood effects literature, that's kind of been a common theme of the last kind of 10 years or so, I think. But I think one of the other things, when we think about environment and obesity, we tend to think about the underlying processes between diet and physical activity as the same. Well, actually they're not. So diet, everyone has to eat, so everyone has to access food at some point, whereas physical activity, that's more discretionary. We know that people who use formal physical activity facilities, that's a very small proportion of the population. So everyone has to go to a shop to buy food, but not everyone has to go to the gym to use that. So when we think about exposure in that context, it makes it a very different proposition. So taking the same theoretical models for the two behaviours is probably not going to be particularly useful. So thinking about how we can do that, and then also has implications when we think about designing environmental interventions as well, because the underlying processes, causal processes, could be actually very different as part of that.